Hello, my name is John Costa and welcome to a special spotlight on Today here in Kaduna. I'm very fortunate to have someone with me that I'm looking forward to having this conversation with, a senator, author, playwright and human rights activist, Shehu Sani. Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for agreeing to talk to me today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Now, doing some research for our interview today, I was quite impressed with your young early life being influenced by books brought into the house by your father. And also your mother's community women's leadership and stuff. So you've been shaped very much at a young age by leadership, taking responsibility, and also maybe the difference between right and wrong, which led you to be student politics and human rights activist and getting international activism. So what do you remember of your early years that have really influenced you that you still draw on today?
Thank you for having me in your program or interview. My father happens to be one of the most earlier educated northern Nigerians, and he can said to be a journalist, but rather better explained as a production manager of a newspaper in northern Nigeria. He worked with a number of newspapers before our independence and after our independence in 1960. He was with the Daily Mail in Kano. He worked with the Gaskia Publishing Company in Zaria. And he worked with the New Nigerian newspapers in Kaduna here. And it also took him to UK and Germany, where he worked with some newspaper houses there. So because of his own profession, I was able to have access to journals and literatures from all parts of the world. The most dominant one were writings, journals, and books from Eastern Europe. During the Cold War, many Eastern European nations, for ideological reasons, were sending tons and tons of books to newspaper houses, to students, to professional bodies in Nigeria, particularly in northern Nigeria. So he brings these books home. So these are some of the books which we read in our early days. Books from Lenin, Marx, Trotsky. You have philosophical books, Albert Camus, books from Chairman Mao, Tolstoy, Leo Tolstoy. We have books from other Chinese writers, and it was such an interesting time for many of us. So as elementary students, I was curious to know what these books were all about. And that was when we got in touch with books like Dialectical Materialism, and quotations and poems from Chairman Mao, and books by Victor Hugo, and also other Latin American radical writers. So that became the foundation of my philosophical thought and perspective on the society which I live in. And African writers and revolutionaries of those very times too. Books from the FNL in Angola and in Algeria, that's National Liberation Front. We have read books from the MPLA, the anti-colonial movement in Angola, the books from Frelimo, and then SWAPO, and the anti-apartheid writers like Stephen Biko. These were books which started and became the foundation of our philosophical ideas and thought.
I think it's interesting because you raise and shine a light on something there that people don't often think about. You know, when we look at the Cold War now as something that was in the past, sort of pre 9/11, if you like, in 2001, very much the predominant end of the 21st century. You're shining a light there on the soft Cold War rather than the way people see the African continent from conflicts in those places that you spoke about there, like in Angola and, you know, Cuban forces being here, CIA, all of those kind of influences, the roles of mercenaries. You're shining a light on a completely different front, which was being fought through soft literature, books, magazines, pamphlets, ideology. I think that's really interesting. How does that shape you today when you look at the politics that play out in Nigeria with the upcoming presidential election, or your role as a senator in northern Nigeria? Do you see it very much as we focus too much on the insecurity and the banditry and those kind of issues? We're not thinking about the role of education and some of those more non-kinetic ways of fighting insurgency.
Well, if you carefully study the Nigerian political scene today, you will see that it has genetics from the politics of the First Republic, where Sardauna, the Aminu Kano, the Awolowo, and the Sikh laid the foundation of Nigeria's political pillars. Now, for those of us who were the younger generation at that very time, our activism was shaped by the sort of philosophical and ideological direction of that very moment. During the Cold War, there was an anti-colonial movement in the whole of Africa, and literature played a very important part in giving people direction and raising the awareness and consciousness of people to rise and fight for their freedom. And that generation produced writers that are leftist leaning, that are anti-colonial, that are anti-establishment. Then a point reached where most of this civilian government crashed and the military took over power, either for issues related to corruption, tribalism, ethnic injustices, religious issues, and sometimes economic problems. So later, when you move away from the 70s and then you come to the 80s, it was still the Cold War. But you see, the civilian governments and the military regimes in Africa were either aligned to the West or aligned to Eastern Europe. If you look at people like Mobutu, he was aligned to the West, and the likes of Mugabe and other leaders, Augustine Neto and other leaders in the continent, all aligned themselves with the Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. So for those of us who later now took from that point, then as the military prolonged its own presence in African political scene, then human rights activism now emerged, which was a new force, a new movement to challenge military rule, to restore democratic order, rule of law, and human rights in our society. So that became the spirit of the mid-80s up to 90s. Now, the role literature played here, not just literature but arts, was directed towards
film as well.
Film,
Yeah.
Directed at the point of getting our people to be awakened that these people who are wearing uniforms and presiding over your affairs are not supposed to be there. They should be challenged, they should be evicted, they should be dislodged, and they should be crushed. So And now the military had to respond with force. So arrest, detention, persecution, use of force to crush protest became the order at that very time. So many of us now had to pay the price for planting the seed of activism, human activism. So that time is no more anti-colonialism. So it's now about fighting to restore democratic order in our country. In that process, many were killed, many were forced to exiles, and people like me were sent to prison. So that is how we are transited as both a nation and also our own individuals as citizens.
Now you've mentioned prison there. Prison comes along and gives you a time of quiet reflection, very little interruption if you're lucky, because you're left alone in isolation. That's exactly what they want for you. And you use that opportunity to revisit almost that younger boy yourself, looking at books and reading books and being influenced. Do you see that younger version of yourself when you sit down to write a book, when you were in prison, that I need to record these things, I need to put them out there, for them to be on the shelf for someone else to influence them?
Yeah. You see, when you find yourself in prison and a prison system where you have to live there for so long, you have very limited contact with the outside world. You are also free from distractions and disruptions. So it was, in quote, a calm and silent moment for you to reflect on yourself. So at that very time, the hidden writer in me now emerged. And despite the restrictions, the strict rules that we were subjected to in prison, I had to put pen and paper and now start writing. By writing, you keep your mind engaged, and by writing, you free your spirit, and by writing, you are preserving certain ideas and ideals that can disappear with time. So it's just like music. If you are a musician, you can be taking a bath and then an idea of music comes, then you rush to your pen and then start writing it. So something with writing. You see, the complexity of human brain, sometimes it rotates to a point in giving you a certain idea of like a flash, and then you have to capture it at that time and you preserve it, or it just goes out. So there's something with writing. So in prison, I picked my pen and paper, I wrote poems, I wrote plays, and I wrote some narratives of prison life. And then I used some of our prison staffs who were sympathetic to our causes. I used them to smuggle out those manuscripts, which later, after I was released from prison, I started publishing them. And what I found out was that it was difficult for me after prison to write like the way I write when I was in prison. Because when you are confined to a cell, you are protected from visitors. You are also chained not to visit anyone. So you don't have any schedule for the day other than to eat, to sleep, to pray, and then now I had to write. So, and if you find yourself in prison, if you choose the path of feeling the pain of loss of freedom, you make your condition worse. So whenever you find yourself in prison as a political prisoner or even as a prisoner in general, make your environment your home. Make it your 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 solace. And then when you do that, you now have the freedom and the spiritual resources to be able to rediscover yourself in that at that very time and under that condition. So being that I was in court lucky to be share presence big names like former President Olusegun Obasanjo, former Chief of General Staff General Shehu, journalists and military top hierarchy, we try to make ourselves a family inside the prison. So you have to forget that you have a family house, because if you start thinking of your wife, your children, of the places you miss visiting, and your visitors, and the life you once lived, you will further destroy yourself psychologically. And I use prison also to study the behavioral pattern of people, detainees there. Is you find people with whole criminal background. They are murderers, they are fraudsters, they are hard assassins, they were sexual offenders, they are teens, they are juveniles, they are old people, they are those who have stayed there for almost 20, 30 years. They call them lifers who are going to spend the rest of their life in prison. So when you find yourself there, and I'll use that also opportunity to study each and every one of them and how they behave. So it's a place where when you, some of the greatest writers in Nigeria, like Professor Wole Soyinka, wrote his book, The Man Died, when he was in criminal prison here, just a few meters from this house. And it became one of the most greatest writers. So I use that as a basis for me to say that I will not waste my prison years doing nothing. I should document my ideas. And now, on and on, when I came out of prison, I enjoyed the writings and literature and arts more than I enjoy being in politics and activism.
So thank you for talking to me. We're going to take our first break. We're going to take our first break now on Spotlight On, and when we return, we're going to be talking about young human rights activists before we move on to your national politics. Welcome back. I'm John Costa here on Spotlight On for a special in Kaduna with Senator, author, playwright and human rights activist Shehu Sani. Thank you very much for agreeing to speak to me today. Before we went to the break, you were talking about time being quiet in prison, being sort of, immersed in being able to concentrate on writing and without any distractions. Now, before we talk about some more national politics and bringing things up to date, I want to just touch on that point, because one of the things that we see at S24, particularly when we're working with young people that are activists and community workers, is the fact that they rely very much on social media for information and background and research, and have not necessarily taken the opportunity to spend time reading, immersing themselves in the reading and writings of others, and to be able to really understand society in a deep context way. It's always very much superficial, which seems a little bit like our media has become now. So do you find that when you talk to human rights activists that are young now, or student activists and stuff, that you feel sometimes they've not necessarily done the required background reading to be well knowledgeable of a subject, and they're still relying on, sometimes it would have been great for you to have social media for the influence and the reach, but social media now seems to have replaced reading or watching films or documentary films or reading newspapers or listening to podcasts or radio shows to get that knowledge. Do you think that's lacking in activism then?
You see, when social media came on board in our global life, I studied it carefully, and I convinced myself that is going to be the strongest tool for information and disinformation all over the world. And I relatively joined at an earlier age the social media system. In my X page, or formerly called Twitter, I have millions of followers, millions. And in my Facebook page, I have hundreds of thousands of followers. And in my Instagram page too, I have hundreds of thousands of followers. Now, the positive side of the social media is that it makes things easier for the world to communicate with each other, to reach out to each other,
Particularly across boundaries.
to propagate ideas and to link up to each other. But at a price of detail and context. The younger generation of today have more access to information than our own generation. And the system enables people to connect with more people in their lifetime than it was during our time. Before the social media era, an average human being would at least have contact with 200 to 300 people in his life. But with the social media era, you have contacts with hundreds of millions of people, some whom you will never ever meet. And if you look at the statistics now, before the social media era, people meet their wives in library, in market, in conference, and other things. But now, overwhelming percentage of people now meet their wives on social media platforms, or they meet their spouses or husband, or how do you put it that, how you can put it that. The negative aspect of social media is that it has both connected and disconnected people. It has also encouraged intellectual laziness, where you have the information, but you are not willing to go.
There's no depth there.
The younger generation reach their analysis from sound bites and reels, and you cannot intellectually discuss issues based on only sound bites and reels. You need to read books to know how it started and how it reached to the point where you have some 2 or 3 seconds of an information which you wrongly reach a conclusion. So, for example, a young man in his 20s, who is said to be a Gen Z, can watch a 3-minute clip of a Nigerian civil war and then reach a conclusion that that was everything that happened. And another thing is that in the consciousness and perspective of the younger generation is that the world began from the social media era. Anything that happened before the social media era is as if it has never happened before. So, social media or the internet has done a lot of good and also has done a lot of harm. Nowadays, those of us who are fathers or parents are struggling to free our children from the influence, the greed, and the obsession of social media. We want them to read books. We want them to pass their exams using their own intellect. The AI, the internet, has made them lazy, and they have become hostages and captives of the systems. So
they're almost shackles of a different type of colonial.
So now, everywhere you go in every part of the world, the children don't want to play with toys. They don't want to watch cartoons. They don't want to ride bicycles. They want to spend the whole day with a tab or a phone in their hands. The earlier children we give birth to can tell you about Tractor Tom, can tell you about McQueen, the cars, Disney. They can tell you about 64 Zule, all these cartoons. They can tell you about Sesame Street. But the later children that were born after 2010, they are only interested in PlayStations. Children don't want to ride bicycles and go around. They don't want to play with toys. So at that level, this is the situation we are. And now you see younger people in social media. You don't see them engaging the older generation from an intellectual point of view. If you can write a full text of the US-Iran conflict, 3 to 4 pages, they will not read it. They simply go to the comment section and send an insult or a sarcasm or abuse anyone they want to abuse. They can't discuss on water, they cannot discuss on electricity, they don't discuss on infrastructure, they don't discuss on health, they don't discuss on education. All they do is make comments and they're okay with it.
So can I ask you, last night at the Kaduna...
So hold on.
Okay, yeah.
Now, books are products of intellectual condensation. People condensed what is in their brain and make it a book. Until you read, the more books you read, the better you can argue, the better you can debate. But if you don't read books, your brain is empty. So in arguments, you can only insult or make comments that are unrelated to what has been discussed. And this is the reality of what has happened today.
Yeah, I guess also by reading books it yourself, by informing yourself and educating yourself. So last night at the opening ceremony of the Kaduna International Film Festival, its 9th edition, you spoke about the state government having the Ministry of Information and Culture, and will that ministry be covering this kind of subject, looking at social media and how it's used and the opportunity that comes by supporting sort of arts festivals and film festivals?
Yeah, films and movies are important component of societal reorientation, societal change. Most people today in their homes, they spend more time watching movies and film than praying. And where their attention is, where their consciousness is, can influence their life and also can influence the whole of society. A good film about motivation and inspiration for young people can do more positive change in their lives than even religion. For the sake that, this is where their attention is. People pray at a very specific period of time, but they always with their phones, looking through, watching through, browsing reels and reading. Now, film as it is in this country is now shaping the thoughts, the ideas, and the thinking of especially the younger generation. Film stars have more followership, more respect, more supporters than even politicians. And people believe, especially younger generation, they believe more in these film stars than they believe in politicians and that they believe in even religious leaders. So you can see if that is where the direction, the thoughts, and the focus of the younger generation is, then that should be used
Okay,
for...
let's take a second break there.
Yes.
I think that's a nice point. So we'll go to a second break. You've been watching Spotlight On, and when we return, we'll be continuing the conversation, particularly around film. Thank you. Welcome back to this Spotlight On special. I'm John Costa, and I'm in conversation with Senator Shehu Sani. Thank you very much again for speaking to us. Now, just before the break there, we were talking about the role of film and also film stars in being able to influence young people due to their followership. You've already mentioned your own social media channels has many followers and many influencers. How do you use something like a Ministry of Information and Culture to work with artists, filmmakers, music performers, people that are being proactive on social media to inform people more about policies and things that they should do, and again, influencing people how they should vote based on what politicians and governments are actually doing and the influence that they're having?
Well, the Ministry of Information and Culture is supposed to be the bridge and the connecting line between power and arts. And arts that can be of use, of value, of influence, and of impact in our society. And that became the reason why that specific section of government should be well funded and should be taken seriously.
Yeah.
Because most times people in government are more interested in other ministries, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Works, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, but they don't think of the human aspect of it. If you have science and technology, you have health, you have education, all these things here will have to still be run by people. And people have to be cultured, people have to be disciplined, people have to be conscious of what they're doing. And it's only on the basis of bridging that gap between the institution of government that is specific in arts, literature, and culture with the larger society. In the past, government uses the TV and the radio and the newspapers to disseminate messages. But the Gen Z don't read newspapers now. The Gen Zs are not interested in any story that goes beyond 3 paragraphs. But they can watch movies. And they can watch dramas. And film is now a platform for which I believe that government policies can be propagated and societal orientation to the positive side can be achieved. It's also a place, it's also a medium where we can set a direction for the future of people. For example, if you have a good documentary on the city of Kaduna, people are likely to watch it and go to the museum. We have a museum just at the back of this my residence. But people don't visit museums. But they sit down in their homes and they watch what actually happened. So I believe that ministries like this, not just at the state level, but the federal level, will be funded, will be prioritized, and must be factored and grafted in the propagation of activities of government, and also in attempt to change the orientation of people. Because if you look at the society which we live in today, the most important problem we are facing, the tragic issues, is insecurity. Bandits and terrorists are attacking schools, they are attacking farmers, they are kidnapping people, and they are extorting ransom. So just 4 days ago, I used a play, stage play, to motivate and inspire people to stand up and confront them. We may not have the AK-47 to fight, but when you inspire people, you strengthen their spirit to believe that these are people that can be defeated at such a time. And the cooperation that is needed with security agencies should be achieved. So if you use film for people to watch and see how at least such criminal activities was defeated in Algeria, you will now inspire them and they have hope that this will end someday. And that is very important as far as the war is concerned. We are living in one of the most dangerous periods in the history of our country. 2,100 will be in the next 74 years. What will be the future of our country? Who will be the kind of Nigerians that are there? I'm not going to be there. You're not going to be there. But the future generation will read about us and the problems we faced. Now we're talking of AI, we're talking of internet, but the next generation will be talking of something else. Things that we consider luxury, modern, sophisticated, advanced in our era, in our time, will just be ordinary and be relics in their own time, in the future. So, but what they will be left with to know about us are books, are movies, are films that we have kept for them to come and see. You are in my house here in Kaduna, and this is 2026. 2126 will be in the next 100 years. I will not be in this house. My children will not be in this house. And the whole world will change. There may be Nigeria and there may not be Nigeria, but there will be Kaduna as a city. And this generation, when they come, if they can go through the history books and read about us, at least they will have footages of all these things that happen. So we shouldn't see films as simply a screen component of love, of passion, but should be seen as an important. And then put an app and then succeed in life. It will inspire younger people in northern Nigeria to think of doing that. So if you have, I read a story about a lady called Campbell. She's from the UK. She moved away from the comfort of her home and traveled to Syria, I think in the Erbil region. And she picked up arms to fight with the women who were persecuted. And she was killed. I see her as an icon, as a heroine that should inspire people to know that wherever your conscience drives you, your conviction drives you, is where you are needed to make a historic change for the whole of humanity. So this is my own thinking as far as films and movies are concerned.
Do you think film also has a role to play, and other cultural activities, in reminding people what we have, and also where we've come from, in order to be able to engage them in conversations about the future, because social media and and films as well can be very much around the future, and we could be moving to here, we could be moving forward, and let's go on this economic journey and improve northern Nigeria. Like I said, this young boy, the talent we have for creating drones and creating apps, but also we need to use culture, and that I like the theme of the Kaduna International Film Festival of Cultural Renaissance, which is getting culture to come back to being not just showing you what a place is like, but where a place has come from and what it means and what informs things.
Yesterday we had the opening of the 9th Kaduna International Film Festival here at the theatre of the Kaduna State University. And I was so impressed by the theme of that festival, which is cultural renaissance. By culture, it means our way of life, our tradition, our food, our values, our identity. And by renaissance means the rebirth of those things. If you talk of cultural renaissance, we are talking about bringing those values that give every human being a moral badge, that despite we are in a world moving at a fast pace of technology and sciences, we should not forget those human values of our respect of our identity, our tradition, those things that makes us animals with dignity and respect. So I have said it in every respect that this festival and this film festival is one opportunity for the younger generation, especially think that we come from a certain point. There was a point in our history as human beings, as Nigerians, as Africans, as people of the world, where respect, human dignity, value, and honor was the gold, was the diamond, and was the silver at that very moment. And for them to know that as we advance into an endless cosmic space of technological advancement, we must keep those values with us, for us to always remind ourselves that we should be accountable in terms of what we do to each other. The Gen Zs are different species of human beings compared to the millennials and the Gen X, because you see them rebellious, you see them riotous, you see them revolting, and they also have a universal tendencies, because the Gen Zs of China, of India, of Brazil, of Argentina, of UK, France, Philippines, they think like the Gen Zs of Nigeria, of Kenya, of Algeria, of Egypt, Tunisia, and Morocco. So you can see the universality of their thought. But
Let me stop you there and we'll take a third break. Welcome back to Spotlight On. I'm John Costa and we're here in Kaduna for our Spotlight special. Welcome to this final part of Spotlight On. I'm here with Senator Shehu Sani. Thank you for talking to me. Just before the break there, we were talking about young people being connected globally, Gen Zers across the world. Do you see hope for the future? You spoke about 2100, you won't be here, I won't be here. Do you see hope for the future in what you see young people that are considered activists now on social media talking to each other about that shared, rather than having to read a book or a pamphlet or a newspaper that's been created under regimes? Now with that, we've got young activists you were talking about in China and different places being able to speak to young activists here in northern Nigeria.
Yeah, you see, it's just like what I've said. The social media generation, which is the Gen Zs, have the positive sides of the benefits of being Gen Z and also the negative sides. We are able to, from the social media system, connect to each other, but they also remain disconnected. When families sit down for dinner, they are supposed to be eating and talking to each other. But people sit down to eat and be scrolling their phones. So you can see how you can be together and not be together. Someone you wish to see for so long will visit you as a guest. And after you had some 5 minutes discussion, and both of you will now start browsing your phones. When girlfriend visit boyfriends or boyfriend visit girlfriends, after 1 or 2 session with each other, everyone pick his phone. In the days of the past, when you have visitors to your sitting room, they pick a family album and go through it. There is a calendar that was in the wall that has beautiful pictures. There is a yellow book for phones. You have the wall clock, all there, and you have the TV. Now, these times of humanity, the TV is gone. Most people don't watch TV. The family album is gone. The wall clock, nobody is interested in it. The wall calendar is no more in use. So everything goes to the phone. And the tradition of inviting a photographer to come and shoot for a whole family is also gone. So this is the disconnect within the social media system. In the next 100 years, there will be greater scientific and technological advancement in all fields. We will come to know what we don't know. We'll come to know more what we have limited knowledge of. But what will suffer as we move to the endless space of time are those things that are today showing sign of crack. There will be less people interested in keeping cultures. There will be less people interested in keeping religious laws and values. There will be less people interested in keeping family values. These are things that are presently even crashing. In the past, people marry at a very young age. Now people reach old ages without even a wife. Without it, more people visit worshiping centers. In the present, it's less. And topics which were taboo culturally and religiously are now being challenged by young people on social media. There are things you cannot say to your children, things children cannot say to their parents in the past. Now children are inquisitive. Children of today don't see themselves as children. They see themselves as your own responsibility to a certain point, and then from there they get their own independence. The way we look at, the way we take custody of our parents, of our grandparents, is not going to be the case with the generation of the future. So it will reach a point where the future will crash by the weight of its own speed, and then it will come back to those values that were lost. Just like now, you see the fashion of the 60s and 50s are now brought back. So also, as humanity continue to move at this phase, when it crashes in where it is going, it will now return back to those values that it has forgotten. So this is the way I look at it in the next 100 years, when we have all been forgotten.
We've forgotten about it.
Yes.
So, just bringing this completely up to date now with your role within politics, do you see, when you look at politics globally, it seems very much around sort of personality-driven sound bites, populism, doing things that are going to get you a vote to get re-elected. How do you take what you've done in your life, how you've lived your life, the things you've been involved in your life, the things that you've experienced, for example, and how do you bring that to work as a senator every day to benefit the people that you represent?
You see, we are still a third world country, and not everyone is on the internet, not everyone is on social media. Most people today, particularly in this part of the country, still depend on radio as a source of their own information. We are now trying to hold on to the values of the past while we keep pace with the advance in science and technology. But a certain point will reach where the future generation are not interested in the values of the past, and they simply move on. And the price we're going to pay for the future has to do with the fact that we are not giving our children the kind of discipline that our parents gave us. People now love their children to the point that they don't want to discipline them. In the past, if you do anything wrong in the school, you can be punished. You can be whipped. You can be seriously penalized for doing that. But parents now don't want their children being penalized, being punished, for the simple reason that they pay a lot of money to the school that admitted their children. And as for the schools too, they operate schools as businesses. So they need more children. They need more students to be with them. And they don't want parents to pull out their children. And then you see them trying to do everything possible to the detriment of discipline and education standard in order to please the children. There was a time I attended one of the graduation ceremonies, and it was a prize-giving day. And I realized almost all the students who are graduating are given one prize or another. And it's supposed to. You are giving someone prize for attending classes, someone prize for dressing well, someone prize for being the neatest student, someone prize for good in speaking English. And all is to appease the parents that your child has done good and that bring more children to our school. So this is the foundation we are laying for the future. We were a product of public schools, public primary school, public secondary school, and public universities. And at that very time, our parents paid little for our education. But now everything has become so commercialized to the point that you see proprietors of private universities giving distinction and first class honors to students So students in public, in private schools now, are all passing their papers because the whole thing has become a business. Now, I'm trying to tell you that this is the kind of generation we are building for the future. When you give them an assignment to do at home, they go to ChatGPT and get the solutions for it. Student doctors, student lawyers, student engineers are no more spending time trying to use their brain and research on things. They simply paste, copy from the internet and then paste. And to the point that the line between artificial intelligence and natural intelligence is closing. One app will tell you that this is the answers you have. There will be another app to moralize those things and remove any traces of being an AI. So you can see the problem. Like recently now, Jason Ade from the University of Cambridge, who was found dead after he was found to have plagiarized in his tests. Now you ask yourself, humanity was so happy when AI was created, when ChatGPT was created. But now it becomes a problem. Now in Australia, in France, and countries of the world, they are thinking of banning children under 16 from having access to the internet. Now, many countries, Sweden and others, are returning back to textbooks and back to traditional way of learning because it's clear that we are heading to do as far as the present world is concerned. So I see myself as a senator, one that will carry along both the old and new generation, and that will bring development and progress to my society using the realities of technology, but also always and every time reminding the younger generation that we come from a journey and we are product of our tradition, our culture, our religion, and those values must not be discarded.
Sir, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me. I saw a lot of emotion there in what you were talking about, drawing back from your past, but I can also see a young Sani here sitting here with a book, and I think that's not to be forgotten, so thank you very much for your time. I've been John Costa here on Spotlight On for a special in Kaduna with Senator Sani. Thank you very much for watching. See you again next time.